this was something that was first proposed, I think, about 18 months ago. I'd been working with the people down the library because I am famously very keen on keeping the libraries open and having them there as a resource for everybody. So when the Central Library was reopening its Carnegie Hall attachment,
yeah,
which I think would have been closed since the Arts Lab and myself used it as a venue for Principal Edward's Magic Theatre back in 1970, September 1970. But I'd not heard of the space being used since then, and so this was quite a big thing, opening up this important sort of theatrical space. And they asked if I'd go along and do a reading from the still forthcoming Jerusalem.
yeah.
I went along, I had a splendid night. I remarked that the concert with Principal Edward's Magic Theatre had happened on the Friday before the Monday when I was expelled from school.
Right.
And that by doing this reading at the Carnegie Hall, I hoped in some mystical way that this would mean that I'd be allowed to go back to school, finish my GCSEs, O-levels and get a decent job. Yeah. But it seemed to go very well the night. And I know one of the people at the library, Ruth Gasson, was... we kept in contact because it had gone so well, and I'm always keen anything that can help keep the libraries open.
Yeah.
You know, I'd sent in a bunch of suggestions at one point when asked by the council if I could come up with suggestions for how to broaden the remit of the library,
yeah,
if you want. And so at some point after that, Ruth, I was talking to her, and she was saying that she'd had some excluded kids into the library who, in the manner of excluded kids, were probably not paying very much attention. They were hostile, they had serious authority issues, and probably a trip round the library didn't seem that scintillating to them.
Yeah.
At which point Ruth had said, oh, well, we had an excluded kid giving a talk down here a month or so ago. And they said, well, who was that? And she asked them if they'd heard of Watchmen and V for Vendetta, and if they'd heard of Alan Moore. And they said that yes, they had. They were surprised to find that I'd been excluded, and they started paying a lot more attention from that point on.
Yeah.
And at which point Ruth suggested that maybe I would be a useful figure to actually talk to some of these kids directly. So this was when what came to be called the Voices of the Fire project began to evolve. And over the next year or 18 months, Ruth and people at the library were putting this thing together very carefully. It was decided to centre it around my novel Voice of the Fire because that is all about Northampton and Northamptonshire.
Yeah.
So that seemed like a logical book to hinge it upon.
Yeah.
So
what was it? Was the idea that you would you'd do a reading and then have a discussion about?
Well, it was left very, very open and very loose, which, given the fact that, as it turned out, I was dealing with three very different groups of excluded kids, that probably was the best policy, to keep it open, because, frankly, a lot of the stories in Voice of the Fire of even confounded or bored, perfectly respectable adults. So it may not be the most... I did read a couple of little bits of it out, but largely just as a sample, rather than to read them any whole stories. For one thing, we've got a limited amount of time. and the shortest story in Voice of the Fire takes about an hour to read.
Yeah.
So sort of no. What I was told that there were 3 groups of kids that I'd be talking to.
Yeah.
The first were the permanently excluded. The second were the temporarily excluded, who were all from one particular school.
Yeah.
And the third group were those who were excluded for mental health issues. And I mean, since I've had very little contact with young people in general,
Yeah.
I really didn't know what to expect. But I went down there. This would have been a week, 10 days ago now, something like that. And I went down on these 3 separate days. The first day I was dealing with the permanently excluded, and yeah, a couple of them were listening and paying attention.
Yeah.
And it's always difficult to tell how well you're getting across to people, but the educators that were there looking after the kids all seemed to be very pleased with the results, and this is of course just the start of a process.
Yeah.
You know, which is designed to sort of take these kids through, I think, 8 or 12 weeks of this, and hopefully reconnect them to the world in a useful way.
Yeah.
The second group of kids were all were temporarily excluded, and were a much more unmanageable mob, at least to start with. But when I found out that they were all from my own beloved Springborough's neighbourhood,
Yeah.
which is the source of all of the work in Jerusalem,
Yes.
then I think we found a rapport.
Yeah.
They seemed to like me. I certainly liked them.
Yeah.
They were, I mean, all of the kids that I met there seemed like tremendous kids.
Yeah.
Or young people, or whatever we're supposed to call them.
Right.
They didn't seem to mind kids. The third group, those who were excluded for mental health issues, they were very intelligent, very sensitive.
Yeah.
Perhaps too sensitive for an often brutal modern world.
Yeah.
They were paying rapt attention. They were also perhaps the most creatively motivated of all the kids that I spoke to.
Yeah.
And for all of these kids, I mean, I personally know what it's like to be excluded.
Yeah.
Everything that you are experiencing, everything you're being told, hammers home the fact that your life is effectively over.
Yeah.
The mechanism that was meant to convey you from your childhood to the world has malfunctioned in some way, and you have been thrown off of the conveyor belt.
Yeah.
It's over for you. That is the sensation that I certainly had when I was 17.
Yeah.
But I was trying to convey to these kids that in many ways my expulsion from school was one of the best things that ever happened to me. It meant that I had to fall back upon my own resources, which I didn't know how great those resources were at the time.
Yeah.
But then, unless we test our resources, we never know what resources we've got to fall back on.
Yeah.
And I was suggesting this to these kids, that yes, realistically, I couldn't say that every one of them would make it, but that they might be surprised at what they could accomplish. We talked a bit about me, my life, my experiences, and I think that at least some of them went away feeling a bit more positive about their situation.
Yeah.
That it suddenly seemed that life hadn't slammed a door in their face, but that there might be, or if it had, there might be other doors opening, other possibilities opening up as well.
Yeah.
So, no, this was brilliant, and I was delighted to take part in it. Everybody involved seemed to be having a really wonderful, constructive time. I'm certainly going to try and keep in touch with a couple of the kids specifically that seem to be the most responsive. And I mean, I know that in the past I've had some issues with the authorities in this town.
Yeah.
But for once, I would have to say that I am completely delighted and have nothing but respect for the way that they are handling this very sensitive issue.
Yeah.
These kids are in a really vulnerable place, and I think that it is hats off to the council, really. And it's not very often that you'll hear me saying that, but I think that it's certainly hats off to whoever is responsible for this wonderful initiative.
Brilliant.
Which is giving a chance to kids who would otherwise be not just excluded from school, but excluded from society, excluded from useful lives. It is giving them a chance to reconnect and to be people who might turn out to be quite exemplary.
Yeah.
So, no, this is a wonderful initiative, and I just think that more people should know about it and know what a good job the council and everybody involved are doing with this Voices of the Fire project. Hopefully, you know, with the success of this project, it might open the door for similar projects across the country. Who knows?
Yeah.
This could benefit an awful lot of kids who really need that help and that support.
Yeah. It's quite poignant. Actually, what you're, it's because you can tell that this really does mean a lot to you because of what happened to you.
Yes, and when I was thrown out of school, there was a deliberate effort to make sure that I could attend no further education, and also that the only jobs that I could get were those which you could probably have got with a criminal record.
Yeah.
The absolute bottom of the barrel jobs.
Yeah.
Now, if I had accepted that as my life, then nobody would have ever heard of me.
No.
None of the books which I've written, and which have brought quite a great deal of attention to this town, at least globally, I would have thought, none of that would have ever happened.
No.
If I had accepted the verdict that I had been dealt.
Yeah.
Instead, I found a way to utilise some of the talents that I hoped and believed were in me.
Yeah.
To actually make something of myself and to achieve something.
Yeah.
Which I think is, it's quite significant.
There's a valuable message to be sharing with kids
especially at that moment in their lives when they are feeling completely abandoned, excommunicated, where all of a sudden a lot of their friends who are still at school are no longer really coming to see them very much. Because they have got the taint of exclusion around them. Their entire lives change. Their family life will possibly change because of what has happened. Everything in that young person's life will be suddenly and starkly different. It's a very lonely and cold place to be. And anything that anybody can do to help